They hate him in the gate that rebuketh, and they abhor him that speaketh uprightly. The words of the prophet Amos 2,500 years ago, and no less true today. And so, my friend, my supporter, a tale is told concerning a great Hasidic tzaddik, a righteous man. As was the custom in the early days of Hasidism, this man, before becoming a teacher and rabbi, went into Golus, exile. That is to say, he chose a life of wandering and poverty, so as to experience a life of want and need, and thus understand the poverty and suffering of the underprivileged and unfortunate. One Friday, the anonymous tzaddik happened to be in a small town, and as the Sabbath approached, he came to the home of the town's wealthy Jew. When the rich man came to the door, the tzaddik, who appeared as a typical pauper, asked if he could be granted lodging for the Sabbath. The wealthy Jew scornfully said there was no room and turned the tzaddik away. Years passed, and the tzaddik now was a famous rabbi and teacher, beloved by thousands and famed throughout the land. And once again, on a Friday, the eve of the Sabbath, he arrived in the same town. This time, however, his presence was heralded with much fanfare, as he arrived in a magnificent coach pulled by 6 white horses. The wealthy Jew, the same who had driven away the so-called pauper years ago, hurried to the hotel where the tzaddik was staying and begged to honor him by offering the hospitality of his home for the Sabbath. The tzaddik replied that he would give his answer within the hour, and after the rich man left, the tzaddik turned to his aide and said, "Take the carriage and the horses and bring them to the home of the wealthy man." The rich man, looking through his window, saw the carriage and horses coming, was overjoyed. The tzaddik was honoring him by staying at his home. But when he rushed out to greet the tzaddik, to his chagrin, he found the carriage empty. Rushing back to the hotel, he asked the tzaddik in dismay, "Rabbi, why did you send me an empty carriage and horses? I asked you to come for the Sabbath." And the tzaddik replied, "No, I sent what you really wanted. Some years ago I came to your house to stay for the Sabbath, and you turned me away. Now you say you wish to have me." I asked myself, I am the same man I was then. What has changed today? What do I have now that I did not have then? And the answer is, a carriage and horses. Apparently that is what you really wanted. I must confess to being surprised and a bit disturbed. Surprised to see and hear so many good Jews depressed and despairing, asking, "What now? Kach has been banned from the Knesset. What is going to be now?" And I am upset, disturbed to see that so many have turned the means into the end. They have made the Knesset, which is always only a tool, into the goal. They have made the horses and the carriages the tzaddik. How they fail to understand. Is the banning of Kach from the Knesset the end of the world? More, has it made Meir Kahane a different person? And my teachings any less meaningful and vital and true? Was the support of Meir Kahane meant for me, or for my carriage and horses, the Knesset? Kach is the same group it always was. I, Meir Kahane, am the same person I've always been. What is this depression and despair? Consider what Kach has done over the years. Consider and stand back in pride and, yes, awe. We took positions that were immensely difficult and unpopular, and by dint of unstinting sacrifice and giving of ourselves, by way of hard work, we forced the Jewish people in Israel to contend with the issues. We compelled them to deal with them and debate them. And most important, we persuaded hundreds of thousands of Jews that we were right. We succeeded in building a powerful, a truly national movement with officers and workers in every part of the country. We captured the minds and hearts of an entire generation of young Jews, civilians and soldiers, who were on the verge of receiving at least 10 seats and capturing an entire generation of potential voters that in the future would have given us power. We faced and fought a state, news media, intellectuals, an entire system and society that tried to crush and destroy us. And we succeeded in becoming the most beloved party among the Jewish masses since the days of Menachem Begin's Cherut. We faced prison sentences, defamation, physical attacks, and so much more, and we overcame all of it. And we compelled the terrified dwarfs and the Hellenists of the political mafia of Israel to make a farce of their idol, Western democracy. They were compelled to destroy democracy to prevent us from running for the Knesset because they knew that they could not defeat us at the polls through democracy. And so they banned us and democracy. And Jews, including good ones, think that this is the end? What is wrong with them? The end? What nonsense! And how little such people know me. Kach is not, nor has it ever been, a political party. We've always been an ideological movement, the carrier of the authentic Jewish idea. We remain exactly that. Nothing has changed. The Knesset was never anything but a means, an important tool, but never more than a tool. When we did not sit in the Knesset before 1984, did we stop? When I lost 3 previous times, and hardly anyone believed I would ever win a seat, did we stop? When we could barely get 5,000 votes in 1977 and 1981, and were laughed off as a fringe group which would never get anywhere, did we stop speaking, writing, persuading, indoctrinating, reaching? Of course not. And so, why should we consider stopping now, when hundreds of thousands of Israeli Jews love us and see us as the real truth and hope of Israel, the only truth and hope of Israel? Why should we stop when the very banning of Kach is testimony to our strength and power? We have the Jewish truth. Has that truth changed? Of course not. So why should we? More important, did we lose? What is a winner and a loser in Judaism? Some 1900 years ago, the Roman legion destroyed Jerusalem, burned the temple, and drove the Jewish people into exile. The Emperor Titus returned to Rome in triumph and had an arch built in commemoration of his victory, and coins minted with the words Judea capta, Judea is captured, destroyed. Judea is a loser. And as the hundreds of thousands of Romans stood that day on the streets of Rome, the capital of the world, the capital of an empire stretching from Brittany in the west to Parthia in the east, watching the bedraggled Jewish prisoners marching in disgrace, did anyone think someday this great empire will be the dust of history? And that day, the descendants of this people, scattered to the winds, enslaved, exiled, without a home, will return to that home, to their own land? No one thought so, except those who had faith. And if anyone standing on the streets of Rome said it, people would have looked upon him as a madman. And yet, almost 1900 years later, during World War II, the British Eighth Army, after capturing Rome from the Germans, marched in a victory parade through the city. And part of the army was a brigade composed of Jewish soldiers from the Holy Land, Palestine. It was known as the Jewish Brigade. And as they reached the Arch of Titus, decaying in the pollution of a city of Rome that was now Italian, not Roman, they paused to paint on the base of the arch the Hebrew words, Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel lives, still live. For the Jew, a setback is never defeat. For one who has truth and is truth can never be defeated, can never be a loser. The Jewish people as a whole can never lose, for they are the chosen people of truth. And those within the Jewish people who know that truth and carry it can certainly never lose. At most it is a setback. At most it is a stumbling. And in the words of King Solomon, for 7 times shall the righteous stumble and rise. That is Judaism. That is faith, the cornerstone and foundation of Judaism. What has happened to Kach was a test, the kind of divine test with which every Jew of greatness and every movement of greatness is faced. From Abraham to our generation, the Almighty tests those whom He loves to see whether they will stand the heat and the anguish and disappointment, to see how much they love Him, to see whether they are truly worthy of carrying the flame of the authentic Jewish idea, of speaking in His name. For Kach, the test was to see whether, faced with the danger of being removed from the Knesset race, unless we changed our program and compromised our Torah truth, we would swerve and give up ideals for political gain. We did not compromise. We cleaved onto the law and bent our necks under the yoke of heaven. We did not lose. We won the greatest victory that any Jew can ever win. No, it was not a defeat for Kach. But what happened was a tragedy for the Jewish people, for the Jewish state. For we are the only hope. And let there be an end to the eternal delusions, the babbling about what is the next best party. Either one has the truth or one does not. For years, Jews helped to bring Israel slowly to tragedy by deluding themselves with the fraud that the Likud was better than Labor. Of course, that was nonsense. There is no basic fundamental difference between the two parties. It is Shamir, not Peres, who has been prime minister during the entire year of the Intifada. It is Shamir and the Likud who refused to annex the liberated areas. It was the Likud, not Labor, that gave up the Sinai. It was Arik Sharon, who was the Minister of Defense, who tore down Yamit. There is no essential difference. One will bring us to tragedy, at best, slower than the other. I see a state of Israel falling apart because it does not understand its role and its destiny on earth, because it does not accept it, it does not bow beneath the yoke, it does not believe and trust in the God of Israel. It has no idea of what constitutes its chosen and special role. It only knows fear of the world and of what the Gentile will say, and so it sits paralyzed in inaction and slowly commits suicide. And so is the immutable and inevitable punishment for lack of faith and lack of strength and lack of sanctification of God's name begins to rise like a tidal wave that emerges from the sea to tower high above the waters and begins rushing toward the mainland. I see this state disintegrate. The stranger in our midst rises higher and higher, even as we sink lower and lower. The Arab grows bolder as Intifada has already entered the country, the state. We will see the fires and stones and attacks and killings reach deep into our cities. The left, the defeatists, the Hellenists meet with our enemies. They destroy us from within. They stab us in the back. The economic balloon begins to burst as hundreds of factories teeter on the verge of bankruptcy, and Moshavim and Kibbutzim stretch out their arms for alms, charity, from a government that cannot satisfy the hunger of lions through chaff. Hatred and bitterness and the sense of despair and hopelessness grow among people, so many of whom dream of escaping elsewhere if only they can. And in the exile, The Jews of the flesh pots feel nothing, see nothing, hear nothing, understand nothing of the terrible Jew hatred that is in their very midst. And in the midst of the disintegration, the stubborn, brazen-faced Jew not only does not seek to return to his God, to have faith, but intensifies his loathing and abhorrence for his laws. He declares war on God and his servants, the keepers and preachers of the law, even as he makes peace with the worst and most abhorrent of his enemies. That is why we must continue. For anyone with eyes to see and the mind to understand, for anyone who wishes to see and understand, can see the terrible, awful tragedy hovering over Israel and the Jewish people. And it comes closer, so terribly closer. And the words of yet another prophet come across the ages, the prophet Ezekiel. If I shall bring upon the land a sword, and the inhabitants shall take a man from amongst them, and they shall appoint him a watchman for them. When he seeth the sword come upon the land, he shall blow the shofar, and warn the people to be a watchman, to warn the Jew, to attempt in every way to save him from his enemies, from himself. That is our obligation. That is Kach. Dare we give in to hopelessness, to despair, to defeat, to depression? Dare we run away from our obligations to our people? God forbid. We are forbidden to lose hope. We are forbidden to run from the most basic obligation of a Jew, to dedicate his life to his people. And so we continue. Of course we continue. We are fighters. Is there a guarantee that we will succeed? Of course not. But the Almighty never obliges us to succeed. He only insists that we move heaven and earth to try. And then we may indeed succeed. Never, never forget your obligation. Our obligation. Kach is the watchman of Israel. Kach is the hope of Israel. The only one. There is no almost as good as Kach. There is only Kach, the one and unique carrier of the authentic Jewish idea. And so of course we continue. We must continue. We will never change our ideology. We will, however, begin anew, fresh. We've changed the name of the vehicle to Kach, strength. We will write and speak only with verses from the Bible and quotations from the Talmud and commentaries. With God's help, because we have sacrificed for him, because we have done that which he wants, and therefore he must do that which we ask. With God's help, we will be in the Knesset again, but this time in huge numbers and on the way to power. But more important, always more important, we will continue in every way to spread the authentic Jewish idea, the Jewish truth. We will continue to have rallies and meetings and seminars and classes. We will reach the Jewish people. We will expand the wonderful Kach Yeshiva, Yeshivat HaRayon, the yeshiva of the Jewish idea. Who knows what will occur in the months and years to come? The continued crumbling and disintegration of the situation can and will lead to an angry and frustrated and frightened Israeli public turning to us as the political structure collapses and they realize that we are the final hope of their children. And so my most important question is to those who are angry and bitter at what the Hellenists of Israel did to us. When one is treated outrageously, does one quit? Does one pick up and leave the fray? Does one allow the obscene opponent to win by default? Of course not. One remains a fighter and one fights back. The real test of real believers and supporters is if they continue to back Kach and myself when times are difficult and troubling. We are the true Jewish winners, and we continue. Having built a tremendous infrastructure and adoring support, we stand on a plateau which none would have imagined possible just a few years ago. We continue now to climb higher. We who are the hope of Israel, the only hope to save it from tragedy. Not only do I not wish to hear of depression and despondency, I want those who truly love and support me to show that, especially now, especially at this time. I have before me an article from an American magazine. It tells of a man who felt so strongly about a cause that he wrote a check for $1.75 million, almost $2 million, to guarantee the success of his cause. Do you know what that cause was? Do you know what great and holy and awesomely important cause so captivated the heart of a man that he gave almost $2 million to it? The cause was the University of Southern California's football team. The man endowed in perpetuity the position of head coach and punter. Shall we laugh? Shall we weep? Or shall we sit quietly and ponder not the man who gives of himself for a football team, but the good Jew who sees the terrifying catastrophe, the awful potential Holocaust approaching his people and his state, who knows that we are the hope, the only hope, and does not leap to give of himself to make the kind of sacrifice for his people and his country that a man does for a football team. I once stood in Jerusalem watching the Mormon Center, the center of missionary activity on Mount Scopus. It is a magnificent building. It cost many millions of dollars, money that came easily for that church, since every Mormon unhesitatingly gives 10% of his income each year for that in which he believes. And that is indeed cause for tears. For how many Jews give maaser, a tithe, 10% of their income for what they believe? How many of us are prepared to sacrifice for truth that which others give so readily for falsehood? I stand a watchman, watching and waiting for those who will help me save our people, even as the clock ticks away, waiting for Jews to sacrifice at least as much as Mormons. No, I do not ask for the 10%, that is, the Jewish, the halachic obligation. I ask at least for a mere 2%. Think. Do you know what 2% is? For one whose income is $20,000 a year, it means $400. For one who earns $30,000, it is $600. For those whom God has blessed with greater wealth, how much do you owe him? Of course, I hope for more from those who were given more by the Almighty. I hope for more, and he surely expects more. My dear supporter and friend, our enemies are convinced that without the Knesset, you will stop supporting me. They are convinced that you support only what they in their tiny minds call a political winner. They are convinced that you will break our hearts. How little they know you. Your reply to them must be a check of sacrifice made out to Jewish overview. This will be your reply to those who committed this obscenity, this outrage against us. This will be your satisfaction, your joy, your obligation. Give me the funds to prove to those who committed the outrage that we continue, that you know what a Jewish winner really is.